Welcome to this A News special. We're moments away from a crucial news conference between Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and US President Donald Trump. The two leaders have been meeting behind closed doors, and with the ongoing conflict in Gaza, a new peace plan on the table and mounting international pressure on Israel, this is a meeting with major implications. We'll take you live as it unfolds, bringing a media update, reactions and expert analysis on what this could mean for the Middle East and beyond. With me in the studio is A News Deputy Editor-in-Chief Orkan Amashov.
Great to be here, Katie, thank you.
Now, we are expecting that news conference in the next few moments, so I may chime in as we're speaking just to bring you that live. But ahead of the meeting, Orkan, tell me your expectations for what's to come.
When Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu delivered that flamingly defiant speech at UN General Assembly a few days ago, the question was that to what extent he will be able to retain the self-same uncompromising line during his meeting with President Trump, and to what extent he will be susceptible or prone to any change, any recalibration. The impression given is that, in particular in the light of what is widely referred to US-initiated 21-point Gaza peace plan, Netanyahu, despite all the challenges, despite all that criticism that will be delivered to him by some of his radical members of his cabinet, may today come up with some sort of a conciliatory note, talking about some sort of compromise of some sort, which will eventually could be described by some people as a pathway to the future Palestinian state. But today we're talking about a peace plan, 21-point Gaza peace plan, which, as we understand, we'll hear about it later in a more concrete way, does entail a couple of key provisions, including the, of course, release of the hostages, number one Israeli priority, and also, well, gradual perhaps Israeli withdrawal from Gaza in return for the safe passage for Hamas members. It looks like that it is a compromise in a sense that Prime Minister Netanyahu was talking about finishing the job in Gaza during his UNGA assembly, UNGA speech. But now it looks like the safe passage for some of the members of Hamas could be even contemplated as part of the wider scheme. And one more element there, it looks like that the voluntary stay of residents of Gaza will be included within that plan, because prior to this moment, the focus had been largely on Israel actually, and this was very evident from some of the statements coming from the members of Benjamin Netanyahu's cabinet, would take some measures kind of inducing this voluntary leave, voluntary withdrawal of those population from that part of that Palestinian territory, from Gaza. It looks like Israel will backtrack on that particular moment, because initially it was about that. But it is a comprehensive plan. It's prepared by the United States. It's a Witkoff plan. It looks very practical. But one thing is the declarative statement made today by Benjamin Netanyahu, committing himself to something, and then the question of implementation. Because we remember the previous...
And how do you think that's going to go down in the Knesset if we think of these ultra-nationalists in Netanyahu's governing coalition? Even if Trump is able to convince Netanyahu today, how do you think that is going to go down with those ultra-nationalist figures in
Absolutely,
the government?
it's a central question, Katie. You put your finger on that exact moment which we need to look at. Some members of Benjamin Netanyahu's government, they are pro-settlement, and they also, actually, those who believe that Israel should, formulate and also constitute direct control in Gaza, with the voluntary, departure of the local population being perceived as a natural objective, and how he will be able to sell this particular proposal to his radical members of his cabinet and some of the members of their parliament, probably in the light of international pressure, which is mounting, and in view of the fact that humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza has led to some negative consequences for the government of Benjamin Netanyahu, he will be able to say that this is a temporary point. Let's agree on that now, and at the later stage we'll take some measures actually militating against the original intention, because there is no single doubt in my mind, in the mind of many people, that everybody who is very sensible about Middle East acknowledges that the state of Israel must be protected. It should be entitled to the right of self-defense and many other things. But this government does not believe in two-state solution. That anything that is agreed today and declared today could be, theoretically be described as a harbinger, as a premonition, as an inception of a future two-state solution implementation. But for Israeli government, it's all about saving the moment now, achieving some sort of arrangement, stabilizing the international situation surrounding the Gaza conflict, and without in any way actually moving away from that ultimate objective. Because let's be very clear, Palestinian state in the West Bank is a totally unacceptable thing for the government of Benjamin Netanyahu. In fact, it will be technically very difficult to establish that state there. But one thing which it seems to crop up during these discussions is that the reform of Palestinian bureaucracy based in Ramallah is part of that plan, and that bureaucracy based in Ramallah should be encouraged. They should be reformed, and as a result of those reforms, then their jurisdiction could be extended to Gaza. This cumulatively will lead to some sort of hope that one day, at some point in the fullness of time, there will be an opportunity for Palestinian state. Benjamin Netanyahu will not perceive it in this light. For him, it will be more like a ceasefire deal focused on releasing hostages. But for the international community, and perhaps for the administration led by President Donald Trump, it will be a peace, putting an end to catastrophe and human suffering, with the potentiality of two-state solution ingrained at the core of it.
Thank you, Orkan, for your insight. Now let's bring in the view from Washington. Our correspondent, Ubi Shabandar, is at the White House. Hi, Ubi. Now, President Trump seems optimistic going into these talks as he talked to journalists. How optimistic is everybody else?
Well, President Trump has promised that he can bring an end to the ongoing fighting and bloodshed in Gaza between Israel and Hamas militants. He did tell reporters earlier that he believes that a peace deal that would end the fighting and bring back the remaining hostages alive is within reach. And we have heard reports that with Prime Minister Netanyahu in the White House, that President Trump also held a phone call with the Prime Minister of Qatar, Mohammed Abdulrahman Al Thani, who's been a key mediator between the Israelis and the Palestinians, for the Americans, and that Qatari role is playing an important piece here, and perhaps finalizing what could be a deal. Now, let's remember that President Trump started his administration with a brief ceasefire that was negotiated between the Israelis and the Palestinians. That was brokered by the Qataris and the Egyptians. That only lasted a short while before the fighting began again. President Trump had really made it a centerpiece of his administration to try to bring this war to an end. And there is a great deal of speculation here in Washington that the president will have to put a significant amount of pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu to finally agree to a deal that would halt the fighting, that would establish a timeline for eventual Israeli military withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, and that would allow badly needed aid into the Gaza Strip. And of course, the remaining 20 or so hostages alive that have been in captivity for so long, perhaps a light at the end of the tunnel for them to be able to come back and see their loved ones. So all eyes here are on the Oval Office here in the White House behind me, in what could be the best chance for an end to this.
Now, this is a significant shift by the Trump administration, who had previously advocated redeveloping Gaza into a US-owned Riviera, isn't it?
So the details on what that final deal will look like, really, it's still being hammered out. Now, we did see in previous iterations and previous discussions here in the White House that President Trump said that he wants to see the Gaza Strip, which is entirely destroyed. Almost all of the major infrastructure in Gaza Strip, in the Gaza city itself, and in the other major city in the Gaza Strip have been essentially pulverized. So the question that the White House has been raising is, well, how do you redevelop the Gaza Strip? And that might still be part of a final deal here that would allow the Palestinian inhabitants of the Gaza Strip to live some sort of normalized life, given that the utter total destruction of all facilities and most major buildings in the Gaza Strip. The big question is that what will the role of other Arab states, including the Arab Gulf allies of the United States that that signed the Abraham Accords with the state of Israel? What role will they have to play in developing a post-war Gaza Strip? And what type of governance will rule over the Gaza Strip? That has been a major issue of contention with the office of Prime Minister Netanyahu, saying that they don't want Hamas to have any role whatsoever in overseeing the governance of Gaza Strip, and that they want Hamas as both a militant and as a governing institution to be totally destroyed and out of the Gaza Strip. So we are waiting to hear the final contours of the deal that are likely still being hammered out at the 11th hour here in the White House.
And obviously these talks have come after a meeting on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly between President Trump and those Arab and Muslim leaders that you mentioned. To what extent do you think that has had an impact on the talks that are happening as we speak?
Well, the meeting between President Trump and leaders of the Arab and Muslim world on the margins of the UN General Assembly in New York certainly had an impact. It was there last week that President Trump said that his discussions with those world leaders, from Turkey to the Arabian Gulf countries and Indonesia, played an important role in advancing what could be a final peace deal in the Gaza Strip with Israel. And we did hear reports that those leaders from the Arab and Islamic world pressed President Trump to reject any Israeli annexation of the Palestinian territories in the West Bank. That had been a major issue of concern, given that certain members of Prime Minister Netanyahu's cabinet were also pushing for total Israeli occupation of the West Bank, and including potential annexation. And that would have more than likely blown up the possibility of any comprehensive peace deal at the Gaza Strip. And of course, Qatar, which is going to been a key mediator, is having those continued discussions with President Trump as he sits with Prime Minister Netanyahu in the White House. According to reports by the Israeli media and Axios, in fact, those reports indicate that President Trump pressured Prime Minister Netanyahu to call the Prime Minister of Qatar and apologize for that Israeli missile strike in Doha that was attempting to target key Hamas leaders who were part of the negotiating team. That strike killed a number of civilians, including a Qatari national. So that role by the Arab states and the Muslim world that are both allies of the United States, and some of which have full diplomatic recognition of Israel, also certainly playing a factor in these talks between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. We are, according to reports, very close to a deal, but until it is announced in the White House by both President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu, because we've been here so many times, until then, until it is officially announced, we have to wait to see what those final contours of that deal looks like. But certainly, according to the reports that our sources have been telling us, we seem to be very, very close to an end to the fighting and perhaps a return of the remaining hostages.
Thank you, Ubi, for bringing us the view from Washington. All eyes on the White House then. We'll keep coming to you throughout this broadcast for your views. Now, Orkan, we're talking about the UN General Assembly and the impact there. And during that meeting, several Western countries like the UK, Australia formally recognised a Palestinian state. To what extent is that putting the pressure on the US and Israel currently? Yeah,
we had an extensive discussion about this symbolic but formal recognition of the contractual state of Palestine by a number of Western countries, including UK, France, Australia, New Zealand and others. I think this has put some pressure on the government of Benjamin Netanyahu in the context of the following reality. I mean, Ubi reflected on those things about the impossibility of annexation of the West Bank. Annexation and occupation are two different things. You can retain occupation without annexing the territory. We know the West Bank was annexed by Kingdom of Jordan back in 1949 and then was occupied by the State of Israel in 1967. So occupying one territory for some considerable time doesn't necessarily mean you need to annex it at a later stage. So Israel is still under no pressure to actually end occupation in that part of Palestinian territory. I think one fundamental thing is that international community, including UK, France, they have been very clear that Israel is taking certain measures on the ground, both in the West Bank by means of increasing the number of settlements, and also in Gaza by means of excessive military operation leading to the exodus of the local population in a manner that could be construed as a clear manifestation of intention of putting an end to the idea of Palestinian state. Because imagine what Israel was doing, whatever officially declared objective of the government of Netanyahu may be, we look at the practical implications. You're increasing the number of settlements in the West Bank, and those settlements are Jewish settlements. They are there at the expense of Palestinian communities. And this creates facts on the ground. And therefore, the possibility of full-fledged Palestinian state in the West Bank becomes utter impossibility. And then you are applying military pressure, exercising this application of force in Gaza by means of forcing people to leave. If there's no population there able to exercise degree of agency or being entitled to that sort of agency, there's no foundation for state. And that recognition was important in the context of making it clear we have legal framework. So we add to the legal language of the 1947 UN vote and also 1967 UN vote, Oslo Accords, putting pressure on Israel, compelling it to agree to the reality that whatever it does on the ground, it will be forced to accept the existence of Palestinians at some point. So in that sense, if you look at the recognition from that particular perspective as a sort of amalgamation of chain of developments, it was indeed very important. I believe it's important legally as well, because once a state, sovereign state, recognizes another sovereign state, this creates a legal fact. And this legal fact will have certain implications. You can, of course, as a sovereign state, could withdraw your recognition at a later stage, but you may not withdraw. So the act of recognition, I think, was more than symbolic, despite the fact that there's nothing to recognize at this particular stage.
Thank you for your insights, Orkan. Now, joining me is Middle East expert Dawood Kutab, who is in Amman, Jordan. Thank you for joining me. Now, before we get into these talks, which are underway, we're getting reports about airstrikes in Gaza City. What more do we know about this and the humanitarian situation as we speak?
It's a disaster situation. Infrastructure is destroyed, the gas, water, and electricity are, the internet is cut off in Gaza City, and people have no...
Apologies to our viewers there, we seem to be having some technical difficulties, but we'll come back to Mr. Kutab as soon as we've ironed those out. Now, Orkan, I'm going to put that to you. What do we know about the humanitarian situation in Gaza currently as this meeting is underway?
We know that the humanitarian situation is incredibly bad. Some analysts, some lawyers describe it as genocide. There are lawyers, very eminent ones, who disagree with this definition. They believe that what's happening is catastrophic. It may be classified as war crime of some sort, but not genocide. I don't think it's our intention to look into those details at this juncture. What matters, whatever happens, they must put an end to that. It's tragic, and it's tragic happening in front of everybody. And I think that is something very important. To what extent?
So with that recognition from the UN, how is that going to affect these talks in that Israel is becoming increasingly isolated? What position does that leave Israel in these talks with the White House?
I think Israel is increasingly isolated on the global stage. Israeli foreign policy, even under Benjamin Netanyahu, I think never has been based on the idea of sort of taking unilateral actions and without taking into account geopolitical realities of the Middle East. And it does militate against the Abrahamic Accords that Israel wants to institute and put into practice. I think there's one thing about the approach of Donald Trump. I think it was mentioned by some of our colleagues and some of our guests in the past as well. Trump believes in the idea of working with winners. And I don't necessarily think Benjamin Netanyahu at this precise moment in time looks like a winner. I mean, he has been pounding Gaza for some time. What was the real impact of that? Israel has not managed to assume full effective control over Gaza. Israel has not managed to defeat Hamas. So what was the practical impact of that? Not really massive. Israel has achieved something at the expense of massive international damage to its reputation. So in that particular respect, I think Israel is increasingly isolated on the global stage. There are those who would say that there is an Israeli resilience and defiance, and they have the sense of right. They will carry on whatever the cost may be, perhaps for some time, but without US support, and US support should not be taken for granted, Israel will not be able to carry on in the same spirit for some considerable time. But remember from the past, Israel is able to retract, to backtrack, to recalibrate, to agree to something which may look like compromise, and then retaliate later. So I think that dominates the mindset of the government, as things appear to me from here.
And Netanyahu is under massive pressure, isn't he? Not only from the Israeli public, but from the hostage families who are also wanting to see an end to this war.
Yes, indeed. And that's a massive part of the domestic pressure, is local, inside the Israeli population, Israeli society, body politics. If we look at the parliament, there is a principal support for destroying Hamas and eliminating this threat, but I don't think there's a unanimous support for destroying Hamas at the expense of effectively destroying the population of Gaza. I think that support is not there. And I vividly remember just, I think last week, probably on Monday, when I was speaking to Andy Patterson from North Yorkshire, and the question emerged about...
Sorry to chime in there, Orkan, as we seem to have our guest. Mr. Kutab, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Lovely. Now, we were talking about that humanitarian situation in Gaza there, as there are reports about airstrikes in Gaza City as this meeting is underway. Can you talk me through what we know about the humanitarian situation on the ground currently?
Yeah, as I said before, it's a disaster situation. But, I think the politics is what is ruling the day. And what Netanyahu likes to do is use extreme pressure on the Palestinian side to get them to make more compromises. He knows that everybody is trying to avoid compromises, and I think he's adding to the already disaster situation in Gaza by ordering more and more attacks on Gaza and the attacks on the Gaza City, while the people have no place to go, and most have decided to stay home, even though many are being killed. And they have little food, water, they have no internet, the electricity is on and off. So there's a lot of problems here. But I think it's Netanyahu's, a crazy idea of adding pressure on the people with the hope that this adds pressure on Hamas to make compromises.
And what about the pressure on Netanyahu currently when Israel's traditional allies are recognizing a Palestinian state? President Trump is meeting with Arab and Muslim leaders. Is that pressure on Netanyahu and growing isolation of Israel, is that adding to the optimism among the Palestinian people?
Well, we have now a kind of a box, and the box has different parts. Some we don't like, some the Israelis don't like. The moment that any of these items are removed, then the other side will stop agreeing to it. Right now, the Arab and Muslim leaders who met with President Trump in the UNGA conference in New York agreed in principle to the idea. Hamas agreed in principle to the plan. Now it's Netanyahu's turn. And if he changes any of the items, then this will cause Hamas and the Arab side to withdraw from their approval. Also, there is the big question of trust. The Palestinians don't trust Netanyahu. They don't trust even Trump. And whatever is agreed to has to be put to the United Nations Security Council. And there has to be some kind of Chapter 7 punishment for any side that will violate the agreement that eventually will be reached. So let's hope for some kind of a breakthrough. But it's very tense and it's very difficult for people to agree on something that doesn't have their confidence in the people behind it.
And what more do we know about this 21-point peace plan? And as you say, what Netanyahu knows and what Hamas knows. Trump seemed very optimistic, but there's mixed reports in terms of what each side has seen and what each side knows about the plan.
As your guest said, it's also possible that the Israelis will agree now and then afterwards come back and carry out further things. They have done that before. The ceasefire that we had earlier when Trump came into power was broken by the Israelis. And nobody has blamed them, nobody held them accountable. So the Israelis know that they can violate even an agreement afterwards, and the Israelis will not pay a price. And what is happening now is that because of the attack on Doha, and now apparently Trump and Netanyahu apologize somehow so that the mediation can go back to Qatar, because Qatar has had the control of the negotiations and is able to somewhat pressure the Hamas to agree. And then when the Israelis killed Qatari security person and lower level Hamas people, it shows that the Israelis don't want peace and they're killing the negotiators that they want to negotiate with. So that means that the trust level is very, very low, and the people need to see the results, need to see the Israelis withdraw, they need to see the Palestinian prisoners also being released, because we have our own hostages, over 1,000 Palestinians who are held in Israel without trial and charge. So there has to be a lot of moving parts. They all have to come together, and to build the trust takes a long time.
And now this comes after Netanyahu's address at the UN General Assembly, where he strongly rejected a Palestinian state. Where does that address leave the negotiations that are happening today?
Well, apparently, in what I read from the 21 piece, the Americans understand that there has to be a political horizon for Palestinians. You cannot have peace only by using military force. You need to also have a second track, which is a political track. So apparently in this draft, what we read from different sources, there is some role for the Palestinian government or the PLO in Gaza, and there is admission by the US that there has to be negotiations on the future, whether it's a two-state solution or any other thing. So the Americans don't come ahead and say we are back, as all Republican and Democratic presidents have agreed to two-state solution. Now Trump is saying, yes, there has to be some kind of a political process, but they don't tell us what it is. And that's very dangerous, because right now we had 30-some years since Oslo, because Oslo built on the gradual idea. It was supposed to be 5 years, now it's 35 years. So Palestinians want to start from the end. They want to start an agreement on a Palestinian state as the goal, and then walk back into negotiations on the borders, on Jerusalem, Al-Aqsa Mosque, holy places, water, electricity, settlers, refugees, and so on. So right now, why the recognition, as your guest said, is very important, is that it removes the question of this is disputed territories, or this is Judea and Samaria. No, this is Israeli-occupied Palestinian territories. And if there is going to be negotiations, it will have to be the leaders of the state of Palestine negotiating with the state of Israel, and not some delegation of Palestinians. So this is very important, the two-state solution and the recognition of the Palestinian state by France and England and Australia and Canada and other countries. But it's not enough. We need to take that one step further after the ceasefire, after the end of the war, to start working on a political horizon. Because what happened in October 7th is a result of 75 years. People were kicked out of Palestine and refugees. 57 years, in 67, Israel occupied the West Bank and Gaza. For 10 years, Gaza was under siege. That caused an explosion. And what you need is to give people hope. And people get hope when they know that there's going to be a Palestinian state. But without hope, people will explode again in different ways.
Now, of course, Trump has condemned October the 7th, but as you mentioned, there has been a shift. Previously, Trump was advocating for redeveloping Gaza into a US-owned Riviera. So where do you think this shift has come from in Trump's policy towards peace in the Middle East?
Right now we have negotiations between the US and Arab countries and the US and Israel. You need a buy-in from Hamas. You cannot have a really good agreement in Gaza unless you have Hamas agreeing to it. To have them agreeing to it, you have to deal with the demands of Palestinians, which is the end of occupation and the war and so on. So I think the reason why they're shifting is because if they really want an agreement to last, no military power, whether Arab or foreign, will go into Gaza if Hamas is opposed. No Arab country is going to spend a single dollar on Gaza if there is no agreement from Hamas. So they need Hamas to agree. And to have Hamas buy-in, you need to listen to what Palestinians are saying and what Hamas is saying. And that's where Trump had to shift from his idealistic idea fed to him by Netanyahu and some of the crazy people around him to a realistic solution where Palestinians can build up their own state, Arab countries, Muslim countries, and rebuilding Gaza. But to do that, we need a buy-in from the Palestinian resistance movement, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and others. And I think that's why they had to shift.
Do you think Qatar should have a place at the negotiating table in this case? Obviously, this is a meeting between Trump and Netanyahu. Should anybody else be here in order for real progress to be made?
You know, normally negotiations are between enemies. The normal situation would be that Israel would sit with the Palestinian leadership and make a deal. Israel doesn't want to sit with Hamas, doesn't want to sit with Mahmoud Abbas. They don't want to talk to any Palestinian. So until that changes, there is indirect talk. So they sit in a hotel, one room where Hamas is, one room where the Mossad is, and the Qataris and some of the American CIA people shift from one room to another, which is really not very efficient and not very usual. But that's what the Israelis want. They don't want to talk to Hamas, but they want Hamas to agree. And if you want to talk, you want results, you need to talk directly to whoever you want to talk to. But anyway, that's the reason why Qatar is important, because they have the trust of Hamas, and they're an ally of the US. And that's why blowing up Doha was such a stupid, crazy idea. And that's why Netanyahu today had to call the Qataris and apologize, because Qatar said they will never allow negotiations anymore unless Israel apologized. So this was kind of a left-handed, offhanded apology, but that's fine. I think now Qatar can come back and be involved in the talks to try to convince Hamas to accept and to work with them and with the Americans to find the right solution.
Thank you very much for providing your insights and for joining us on the programme.
You're welcome.
Now, Orkan, we're moments away from that press conference. We'll keep bringing you the updates. So what are your thoughts as we've talked about that evolving stance of the White House on this conflict? Traditionally, the US and Israel are firm allies, but there is mounting pressure on both the US and Israel, isn't there?
Yes, indeed, and particularly on Israel, because Israel, the United States is more than capable of facing that pressure and actually doing nothing as a result of the pressure. Whereas Israel's case is a bit different, because Israel is too reliant on the United States. Well, I do not really believe, genuinely, the United States is currently thinking about the implementation of two-state solution. That's a long-term ambition, may happen, may not happen. What matters now is to achieve the ceasefire deal, which will release the hostages and will put an end to the human suffering in Gaza, and will ensure that the Palestinians of Gaza will be able to stay there, and there will be no question of their complete obliteration from that land where they should stay and form their own state. It's very interesting. The status of Hamas is incredibly delicate, and from the answers we heard earlier, we realized, and it has been clear to me and to everybody else, that there is a sense amongst many Palestinians that Hamas is their legitimate representative. I mean, it's very clear there. It's clear from those answers we heard there. Hamas, in the eyes of international community, preponderant part of international community, not everybody, of course, Turkey is not looking that way, is a terrorist organization. And so you're not supposed to let terrorist organization run a certain section of land there, and you cannot give them legitimacy. But that's a view maintained by majority of Western countries, but not particularly shared by other regional actors like Turkey, for example. And not everybody recognized Hamas as a terrorist organization, which is also something we need to bear in mind. But I think, ultimately, bearing in mind what Mahmoud Abbas said, the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah, there must be some sort of transition. And as a result of that transition, it must be very clear. Hostages should be released. Israelis should withdraw from Gaza in return for the safe the passage of some of the members of Hamas. So instead of actually focusing on physical destruction of Hamas in Gaza, Israel should let them leave that territory, and they should play absolutely no role in the future of the governance of Gaza. And there was one particular point in that 21-point plan which is referred to. I don't know what will be the ultimate wording that we should hear, but there was one line, the de-radicalization of local population of Gaza. So what does it effectively mean? It assumes that population there supports Hamas in its in its fundamental sort of section chunk, and they should be persuaded into believing in something else. So sort of delinking the local population from Hamas. Is it feasible? Is it doable? This is an Israeli demand taken into account by the United States and put into that paper. And will Mahmoud Abbas later and his underlings, his political partners, the allies, would be able to exert influence on the local population of Gaza there? That's a major question. I think that plan envisions a horizon for future Palestinian sort of settlement without mentioning the actual creation of state. I think we need to distinguish between ceasefire and peace negotiations. What is happening there currently, to me, looks like a ceasefire deal, which has a tactical purpose to put an end to this suffering, release the hostages, but the actual peace architecture probably will emerge something at some point later.
Thank you, Orkan, for your insights. Now, I'd like to return to Washington and our Washington correspondent, Ubi Shabanda. Now, Ubi, the plan reportedly includes what the Times of Israel said would be a pathway to a future Palestinian state. Statehood is something Netanyahu strongly rejected in his recent address to the UN. So could Trump be receiving a reality check at this meeting?
Well, from what we're hearing here in Washington is that President Trump and his team, particularly Steve Witkoff, the president's Middle East advisor, and Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, who've been involved in the negotiations with the Israelis in the preceding days, they are reportedly putting a great deal of pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu to accept President Trump's peace plan, a plan that, according to what we're hearing, has been essentially agreed upon by the Arab allies, including by Qatar, which is, along with Egypt, the key mediator here. So what we're hearing is that if Prime Minister Netanyahu does not accept this plan, it would be essentially viewed as a major insult to President Trump, and the president may, for the first time, lay the blame solely on Bibi Netanyahu for not accepting his peace plan. We heard the president on a number of occasions in New York during the UN General Assembly say that they were close to a deal, that he had the support of Turkey, Qatar, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and other Arab and Muslim countries behind his peace plan. And for the first time, we also saw a united Arab effort here following the Israeli airstrike in Doha that attempted to kill, but failed to kill, the main Hamas negotiators. So that phone call that President Trump essentially had Prime Minister Netanyahu make to the Qatari Prime Minister to apologize for that strike and for the subsequent death of a Qatari security guard really also paved the way for Qatar to return as a key mediator here, because Qatar is viewed essentially as the main Arab pressure on Hamas to accept the deal. So now it seems that it is really up to Prime Minister Netanyahu. And if he rejects the deal, he could be facing significant consequences from his most important ally, the United States.
Just to remind our viewers there, we will be bringing you that news conference between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu in the coming minutes. We're just waiting for those leaders to appear. Now, you're talking, Ubi, about that pressure that Trump is putting on Netanyahu, but traditionally, these are two allies. Netanyahu has met with Trump more than any other foreign leader. Could you talk us through those meetings that have taken place and how that relationship between Trump and Netanyahu has evolved to what it is today?
Now, there is no question that President Trump has been a vocal ally of Israel, saying that Hamas must be defeated, that the hostages must be returned alive, and those hostages that have been killed, that their bodies must be returned to their families in Israel. So President Trump has made it clear that he stands by America's ally, Israel. At the same time, President Trump has a massive Middle East peace agenda that he wants to achieve as part of his legacy and that he wants to follow through discussions with America's close Arab allies that belong to the Abraham Accords, who want this war in Gaza and the suffering to finally come to an end. So a great deal of political capital has been expended by President Trump as an effort to bring an end to this war. And so this peace deal and the agreement by both the Israelis and by Hamas is incredibly important to President Trump, both politically and geopolitically, in terms of what America's wider policy in the Middle East. So a great deal is at stake here. So that alliance and that close proximity between President Trump and his team with Prime Minister Netanyahu and his administration essentially also offers President Trump a great deal of leverage over the Israelis. Remember, there was briefly a ceasefire deal that was achieved essentially with President Trump taking office in that first day, but that deal fell through after a few days. So this is viewed by President Trump as being important for his administration's strategic objectives in the Middle East and as part of his legacy as a peacemaker.
And of course, this comes as Israel's other traditional allies, such as the UK, Canada, Australia. They've now recognised a Palestinian state at the UN General Assembly. Do you think Netanyahu's getting nervous?
Well, President Trump has said that he rejects the unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state. He said in New York that recognizing a Palestinian state without any type of concessions from Hamas or the release of the hostages only rewards Hamas. So we haven't seen an outright rejection of a Palestinian state by the Trump administration. But what President Trump and his team, including Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, the immediate priority right now is to bring this war to an end, to bring the hostages back, to bring the bodies of the hostages that were killed back to their loved ones, and to bring in badly needed aid to prevent mass starvation in the Gaza Strip. So on one hand, the Israelis might be able to deal with pressure from the United Kingdom and Australia and the unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state by some European countries. But really, Washington, D.C. has all the cards here, given the billions of dollars of military aid that Washington gives Israel, and the fact that President Trump ultimately has the power to put significant amount of diplomatic and economic pressure on Israel, with the United States being the indispensable ally for Israel.
And we've talked a lot about that UN General Assembly. To what extent do you think that has really impacted the talks that are taking place today?
Well, that meeting between President Trump and Turkey, Qatar, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, the United Arab Emirates seemed to have been a turning point here, because we saw a general consensus within the Arab and Muslim world towards a peace deal that we hadn't seen before. And that was, of course, following that Israeli strike on Doha that was so unprecedented and really was a rallying cry for regional states. So President Trump said that those countries had agreed to his peace plan, and that put the political pressure on Netanyahu to agree to the deal. Otherwise, Netanyahu would essentially face the entirety of the blame for not agreeing with President Trump's deal that would bring an end to the fighting. So the involvement of Qatar as the mediator, and now it seems that Qatar is back as a key component of the peace deal following the reported apology by Prime Minister Netanyahu to the Qatari Prime Minister for that Israeli strike on the Hamas office in Doha. And it seems that there is a general consensus among key Muslim and Arab leaders for Trump's peace plan. And that seems to have been a part of the momentum that is getting us where we are today, where Prime Minister Netanyahu is the one who must now put his signature on the deal with the Qataris and other Arab states, saying that they can bring Hamas to agree to their end of the bargain. But until we see those signatures on that peace deal, it is not final just yet. Those negotiations taking place till the 11th hour over the weekend and into this morning here in Washington, D.C. And that is why The entire world's media and all eyes are right now on Washington and what will come out of the joint press conference between President Trump and Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu.
Thank you, Ubi. Now, our Washington correspondent will be staying with us throughout this broadcast, bringing us the latest developments from Washington, D.C. Now, Orhan, if this plan is to have any chance of success, it seems that both Hamas and the Israeli government are going to have to make much greater concessions that they've committed themselves to so far.
I think this deal, this ceasefire deal or peace deal, if you like to use the word peace deal, has a chance of being declared, absolutely. Its chances of being properly implemented are still very minuscule in view of what happened last time. The one thing is to agree on a particular timeline, agree on principles, and start implementing it. And at a certain stage, everything may crumble if Israel takes a measure which is not exactly in line with that deal, or Hamas committing some sort of a terrorist attack somewhere else. Everything will crumble. So
but Trump seemed really confident going into that meeting.
But Trump was incredibly confident about the Alaska meeting as well. What has come out of it?
So you're not so convinced?
I'm not very convinced. But if I'm provided with substantial evidence, I would be more than happy to change my opinion. It's not about sort of a stubborn sort of adherence to a particular point of view, which is all about pessimism. It's naturally about facts on the ground, what you know, and what is likely to happen on the basis of the previous experience. I think for the government, for the administration in Washington, D.C., it's absolutely essential to just maintain and to sort of augment this image of a peacemaker. And I'm absolutely sure that Trump wants to achieve something very tangible. But that tangible is not a peace deal in real sense. That tangible involves ceasefire deal, release of hostages, some sort of stability, some kind of withdrawal of Hamas forces from Gaza, an aid coming in to the rescue of the population, and that would be good enough to be going on with. I mean, if we're talking about two-state solution as if it should happen tomorrow morning or next year, it's an ambition. It is a perfectly legitimate ambition which stems from the sense of justice, stems from the history, from the original promise given back in 1917, the fact that the Arabs of the Palestine back then constituted a majority, and in 1947 when the divide took place, there were actually two-thirds of the population back then, and Jewish population of the former Palestinian mandate was about 1/3 of that population, but they had 55% of the territory, and they got now they have the 87% of the territory as part of Israel proper. So everybody who's examining this particular subject, whether they're Israelis or Palestinians or Arabs, doesn't really matter. They look at it from the perspective of justice. There was a real demographics on the ground that was altered. Palestinians or Arabs of Palestine were promised a state that was never delivered. That's not exactly the fault of only the fault of Israel, also the fault of some other actors in the region. And now time has arrived, in particular, in the light of what's happening in Gaza, which is nothing but a massive human suffering of the proportion never heard in the history of humanity over the past decades, and that must be addressed and must fix. We cannot let that continue in the self-same fashion. And naturally, the United States, as a global actor, the world's number one force, wants to be consequential in that particular sense, in particular bearing in mind Trump's own ambition, personal ambition, to be a consequential figure, changing circumstances on the ground. So in that sense, I think it's all very clear.
And what do you think the turning point was? Obviously, we're seeing Israel's traditional allies recognise a Palestinian state. We see that shift in rhetoric from President Trump. Was there a moment, was there a turning point you think that changed that traditional allyship more towards an increase in isolation for Israel?
By traditional allyship, do you refer to the relations between Israel and the United States, or between Israel and those Western countries like France and the UK?
Those Western countries.
I think from the very beginning, Israel never excluded the possibility of creation of a Palestinian state. Their argument, and this was clearly reiterated during that UNGA delivery of Benjamin Netanyahu, was that we want a Palestinian state. We're fully in favor of this idea, but Palestinians themselves...
Now, Netanyahu strongly rejected a Palestinian state.
You already said the following. It's not a question of us recognizing Palestine or not. It's a question that they would never recognize Jews. That's what he said during the UNGA session. He said that recognition of Palestinian state is an impossibility given the current circumstances. But he never outrightly, unequivocally rejected the creation of some sort of conjectural state at some point later. But what he was saying that we're not, what he was saying in real sense, I think, was that it's not a question of us not recognizing state of Palestine. It's a question of them not recognizing state of Israel. He was referring to the charter of Hamas. He was even, he said that the bureaucracy led by Mahmoud Abbas is corrupt as a bone. I think that's what he said. He's effectively saying that Arab states do not have any interest in terms of the creation of a Palestinian state. It's not the problem emanating from what we want. It's a problem which is emanating from Arab states and from Palestinians themselves, because Hamas does not want the creation of a Palestinian state. So really, they are sort of deflecting it. They're effectively saying the problem does not emanate from us. And the dehumanization of the Palestinians, I think, whatever we may think about government of Benjamin Netanyahu, has been part of the deliberate effort. Because what he said during UNGA, he said that 90% of Palestinians, and I assume by 90% of Palestinians, he meant 90% of the Palestinian population, both in the West Bank and Gaza, celebrated 7th of October massacre. That's what he said. The person from Tel Aviv, I think that Ori Goldberg joined, and he said that there was a complete lie. There's absolutely no indication that 90% of the population might have supported what happened on the 7th of October. And then he said that 90% of his own local population supports his policy regarding Gaza. This is also something that needs to be sort of taken with a pinch of salt, I think. The reality there is that Israeli policy has been, in particular under Benjamin Netanyahu, this inherent skepticism of the viability of Palestinians in the first place. So it's a wild idea. You may entertain it for some time, but that will never happen because Palestinians do lack agency. Their agency is Hamas, and Hamas is a terrorist organization. How could you potentially conceive the idea of population supporting terrorist organization having a state? That's the key of Israeli reasoning. Israel is not outrightly rejecting the possibility of the conjectural Palestinian state. They say that they would not be able to create because they do not deserve to have a state, because they don't lack the credentials of having a state. I think that would be Israeli position. And I'm not at all sure that Benjamin Netanyahu currently contemplates the idea of two-state solution. It's all about facing a safe at this juncture, making a tactical sort of compromise to save the moment, and perhaps come back later with full force. That has been the case in the past.
Thank you, Orkan, for sharing your view. Now let's return to Jordan and Middle East expert Duad Kutab. Now, we're talking a lot about this plan, and we're expecting to hear from President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu in the coming moments. However, over the weekend, Netanyahu said that no deal had been finalised, and Hamas said it had not formally seen Trump's proposal. Is all of this optimism that we got from Trump going into that meeting, is it too early? How optimistic are you?
Well, he's always optimistic. He said that there will be the end of Ukrainian-Russian war on the first day, and it didn't happen. So, I mean, that's a politician. All politicians try to do that. I'm hopeful. I like the hopeful peace, but you need to work for peace. It's not enough to hope that there will be peace. You have to, and what is happening now apparently is that pressure, and the pressure on the Israelis to come and see the reality, see where they are in the international arena, where they've been isolated, and they're also call the U.S. because every time the U.S. stands and vetoes a resolution, they did it 6 times in the last 2 years, they get insulted, they get harassed, they get bad publicity around the world. So America first, as what Trump talks about, is becoming Israel first, and that is not to Trump's favor. And the MAGA, the Make America Great Again group, the people who brought Trump to power, are not happy with him. And you have Tucker Carlson, you have others who are attacking the influence of Israel, pro-Israel lobby, the AIPAC, as causing Trump to act in the behalf of a foreign country, not on the behalf of the interest of the state of the United States. So, yes, I think it makes sense that Trump has to start changing course, and for the last person he spoke to.
Now I'm just getting some updates that there is some movement in Washington, so apologies if I do have to chime in and cut to that news conference in the White House. But just remind us before that of the key sticking points on both sides in order to reach a deal and get some sort of agreement over the line.
Well, we need, as I said, we need a buy-in from Hamas, and we need a buy-in from Israel. I mean, Netanyahu controls the army and he can order them to withdraw any day now. Biden from Hamas will not agree to give up its weapons, but it has agreed to give up governing Gaza, which is a big point. Now, if somebody else governs Gaza, the question is what will happen to the weapons of Hamas. In the North Ireland situation, when they had the Sinn Féin, they put them in some kind of warehouses and locked them, and they had 2 keys and so on. So there might be a solution as to what happens to the weapons of Hamas. The second point is, will there be a PLO police in Gaza? Arab countries and Turkey and others are insisting that there has to be a role for the Palestinians. Palestinians consider West Bank and Gaza to be one entity. The Americans consider that one entity because the Oslo Accord signed in the White House Gaza and the West Bank to be one entity. So we need to have one law, one security force, and there has to be a Palestinian leadership and Palestinian laws. So that is a stick with the Israelis because the right-wing Israelis don't want any role for the most peaceful Palestinian leader Israel has ever seen. Mahmoud Abbas is against Hamas, is against the weaponization of Hamas, is in favor of disarming Hamas. And yet even that most peaceful Palestinians is being demonized by Israel, and somewhat the U.S. fell for that by denying the right to be a UN. You know, everybody went to the UN except the Palestinians, and not any Palestinian. They're very modest and moderate. So we have a problem because Netanyahu is blackmailed by his right-wing groups and his own maybe ideology as well. So if that is resolved, then we have another issue, which is who will be paying for the rebuilding of Gaza. Arab countries will only agree if there is a buy-in from Hamas and if the Palestinian, the pathway, the roadmap to a Palestinian state is agreed to. Now, in the language of the 21, there is talk about ambition, political ambitions of Palestine, but it doesn't spell out two-state solution. And that, I think, for the time being, Arab and Turkey and other Muslim countries agree to that, but I don't think it will be enough.
And who do you envisioning? You talk about this pathway, and who do you envision would govern the Gaza Strip?
According to this plan, it would be technocratic Palestinian leadership, people who are not affiliated with Hamas or with any other group, but people who are experts, doctors and engineers and so on. Now, there was a question, who will create this list? It was supposed to be created by a presidential communique from Mahmoud Abbas. I don't know if that will happen, but it would be probably agreement with the Palestinians because, again, Palestinians and the Hamas are not involved and they don't agree to this plan. No Arab money will be spent, no Arab in Gaza, and the plan will fail. So you need to find that balance in which you can find the common ground between ones, which is to get their hostages back and to weaken Hamas, but not. I don't think they can totally end Hamas's military presence, but they have already weakened Hamas. And I think if the Palestinian police is allowed to come back along with Arab and maybe Islamic and international forces, they can gradually take over policing first and then maybe overall security.
Now, you described Mahmoud Abbas as one of the most moderate Palestinian leaders, yet in Benjamin Netanyahu's speech to the UN, he described the Palestinian Authority as corrupt. What did you make of that, and what does that mean for these talks?
Saying that a bowl shines with what's in it, and corrupt prime minister in Israel has little credibility to call the Palestinian government. No, I don't know any democratic that or George Washington, when he revolted against the British, was not elected by anybody. So the idea that Palestinians have to be pure as Switzerland to be able to have their own is finding excuses not to give up occupation. Netanyahu himself is corrupt. He's indicted in his own country. He's indicted and wanted by the international court. So his view of whether Palestinian government is corrupt or not, I suffered from some mistakes of the Palestinian government, but I'm telling you that this issue of Palestinian right to self-determination is an existential issue. I mean, idea of, yes, there is corruption in every country in the world, some more, some less, but that does not deny a country from ruling its own self. And the Israeli army, which is forging and covering up for the settlers who are taking over Palestinian lands, certainly is doing illegal action that is a violation of conventions. So I wouldn't pay much attention to what Netanyahu says about Palestinians. He has his own problems with his own corruption.
Thank you very much for bringing us your insights, and we will keep coming to you throughout the programme for your valuable contributions. Thank you. Now, I'd like to switch over to Washington and our correspondent in Washington, D.C., Ubi Shabandar, as I believe the White House has released more information. Ubi, could you tell us what more we know?
Yeah, we're getting some more details on the Trump plan to end the war in Gaza, just released by the White House. Essentially, it'll be an incremental multi-stage plan where within 72 hours of Israel agreeing to the deal, that Hamas is expected to release all of the hostages, both those that are alive and the bodies of the deceased. In return, Israel will release nearly 200 prisoners, Palestinian prisoners who are serving life sentences, and other Palestinians who have been detained following the October 7th attack by Hamas that killed over 1,000 Israelis. There will then be a staged, multi-pronged withdrawal of Israeli military forces, the Israeli from within a certain amount of kilometers outside of Gaza City and Rafah, and then eventually outside of Gaza altogether. Although, according to the map that was released by the White House, Israel will retain a small buffer zone on the border of Gaza and Israel. The White House will also agree to a reconstruction and economic redevelopment plan of the Gaza Strip that would include returning essential services and bringing in badly needed aid that the Israeli government would immediately allow to enter the Gaza Strip, with millions of Palestinians in Gaza on the verge of starvation. So those seem to be the broad contours of the deal here, with the Trump administration agreeing to also facilitating talks between the Palestinians and the Israeli government. So the fact that this deal was just published on social media, that could be another indicator here of how close we are to a deal that would be agreed upon by Israel, and that then the Qataris, as the main Arab mediators, would then get Hamas to sign onto as well. We all do know that there is a Qatari negotiating team here in Washington, D.C., in the White House as well, and that phone call that President Trump had Prime Minister Netanyahu with the Qatari Prime Minister also included an apology for Israel violating the sovereignty of Qatar when they launched that missile strike in Doha, attempting but failing to kill the Hamas negotiating team. So more details coming out of the White House here that seem to be indicating both pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu and pressure on Hamas to agree to a deal that would essentially end the war and release all the hostages and allow for economic development in the war-ravaged Gaza Strip.
And I'm sure we'll be hearing more details in that upcoming press conference, which are expected in a few moments. But in the meantime, Ubi, how likely do you think it is that Hamas is going to agree to this?
Well, they may have really no choice. This deal that was released by the White House also includes provisions for amnesty for members of Hamas who down their weapons and agree to peaceful coexistence to Israel. That had been a main concern for the Israelis, because they wanted to ensure that the Gaza Strip will never again be used for another attack like that of October 7th that shocked Israel, killed over 1,000 Israelis, mostly civilians, and really shook the Israeli state to its core. So a key demand by Israel is to ensure that Gaza Strip is fully demilitarized and that Hamas as a militant and as a governing entity comes to an end. The deal, the contours of the deal that have been published by the White House just moments ago also allow for members of Hamas's leadership to leave and evacuate the Gaza Strip to a country of their choice is another option. So this may be the best deal that Hamas can hope for to date. They are also facing a significant amount of pressure by Palestinians that want this war to finally come to an end.
Now, we've seen Trump brokered ceasefire deals before, and none of them have lasted very long. Why should we believe that this deal is any different?
Well, it seems that President Trump is throwing the whole weight of his office and his administration towards this deal. And the fact that we've heard President Trump on a number of instances in New York during the UN General Assembly say that he believed a peace deal that is essentially being called the Trump peace deal is very close, so that it only requires a few more points of negotiations with Prime Minister Netanyahu's team and with Hamas. So this seems to be the closest we are to a deal since that January deal that briefly led to a ceasefire that then collapsed. But now we're with the Qataris back on the table, with the Arab and Muslim world backing the Trump deal. And it seems with President Trump and Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff putting a significant amount of political pressure on Bibi Netanyahu, it seems that we are on the verge of a deal. But until we hear it from President Trump and from Prime Minister Netanyahu live on television, it is not final.
That's right, Ubi. And how do you think some of the members of Netanyahu's Knesset will be reacting to this? Some of those far right members of his coalition, how will that be going down over in Israel?
Well, interestingly enough, Prime Minister Netanyahu has been facing a great deal of domestic pressure to accept this deal, to accept a deal that was essentially most of the points in this deal have been presented to Bibi Netanyahu months ago. And we were also seeing unprecedented pressure by family members of those hostages that are still held in captivity by Hamas. Those family members went on American television and publicly rebuked Prime Minister Netanyahu for pursuing political expediency and prolonging the war in an effort to perhaps avoid political prosecution instead of agreeing to a deal that would have a high chance of bringing the remaining hostages back alive and to bring the bodies of those who were killed back to their loved ones in Israel. So Prime Minister Netanyahu also facing a great deal of pressure by broad sectors of the Israeli public to bring an end to this war. But he is also facing pressure from members of his coalition government to not allow Hamas to essentially come out of this conflict, and perhaps Hamas will try to claim victory here. But the part of this deal that have been published by the White House essentially demilitarizes Hamas and brings that group to an end, both in terms of a military fighting force and as a governing force. So perhaps Prime Minister Netanyahu will be able to use that to convince the more hardline members of his coalition to accept this deal, because it could very well be a politically disastrous deal domestically for Prime Minister Netanyahu. His coalition government could perhaps collapse if he does accept this deal. So there is both the pressure he is facing from family members of the hostages to agree to a peace deal, and the political pressure that he's facing from his more hardline members of his coalition government that could then perhaps lead to the collapse of his political coalition, because this deal, according to what the White House has released, essentially excludes the possibility of Israeli annexation of the Gaza Strip, something that some members of Prime Minister Netanyahu's coalition government has said was an objective of theirs. So a great deal at stake for Prime Minister Netanyahu, facing pressure from President Trump on the one hand and facing pressure from the Israeli public on the other. And that is why so much is at stake here. We seem to be on the cusp of an end to the war in Gaza, which would bring relief to the family members of the hostages that are still held in captivity and to millions of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, which has essentially been entirely annihilated.
Thank you, Ubi, for those latest developments there from Washington. Now, just to bring you some updates at home, we're hearing that Marco Rubio, Jared Kushner, Steve Witkoff and Vice President J.D. Vance have all arrived at that news conference there. So we are expecting it imminently in the next few moments. But in the meantime, Orkan, what is your reaction to those latest developments out of Washington?
And I think that Washington is doing its level best to ensure that the last touches, the last elements are added, make it more palatable, make it more sellable, so to say. And effectively, we are on the verge of some sort of declaration. There's no doubt in my mind we will hear something declarative, something entailing a timeline. The question of the implementation come at a later stage. And today has been a day of many revelations and information, different types of sort of leaks were coming our way. And effectively what is happening now, Katie, we hear from Ubi, who is sharing his reflections, the information that came his way. We hear from the analyst from Jordan, distinguished analyst, and we're really trying to make a sense of what will eventually be declared. And that will be declared at a later stage. And as Ubi said earlier,
I'm hearing that Netanyahu and Trump are arriving. So let's cut to that in Washington now. Let's hear what they've got to say.
Thank you very much, everybody. So this is a big, big day, a beautiful day, potentially one of the great days ever in civilization. Things that have been going on for hundreds of years and thousands of years. We're going to, at least we're at a minimum very, very close, and I think we're beyond very close. And I want to thank Bibi for really getting in there and doing a job. We've worked well together, as we have with many other countries, both of us, with many other countries, which is the only way this whole situation gets solved. And I'm not just talking about Gaza. Gaza is one thing, but we're talking about much beyond Gaza. The whole deal, everything getting solved. It's called peace in the Middle East. So today is a historic day for peace, and Prime Minister Netanyahu and I have just concluded an important meeting on many vital issues, including Iran, trade, the expansion of the Abraham Accords, and most importantly, we discussed how to end the war in Gaza, but it's just a part of the bigger picture, which is peace in the Middle East. And let's call it eternal peace in the Middle East. So this is far more than anybody expected, but the level of support that I've had from the nations in the Middle East and surrounding Israel and neighbors of Israel has been incredible. Incredible. Every single one of them. This afternoon, after extensive consultation with our friends and partners throughout the region, I'm formally releasing our principles for peace, which people have really liked, I must say. And these are done, not just routinely done, these are done with total consideration and working with the nations that we're talking about. All of these nations have made contributions to those suggestions. I want to thank the leaders of many Arab and Muslim nations for their tremendous support in developing the proposal, along with many of our allies in Europe. Europe has been very much involved, and as I was called by many of the European leaders, most of them saying, is this true? Are you really doing peace in the Middle East? This is the most incredible thing we've heard. Some think it's the biggest thing they've ever heard. They called just to find out, was it just a rumor or is it actually done? And then they said, have you spoken to the Arab leaders? Have you spoken to all of the other leaders that we have to get? A lot of people involved in this one. I also want to thank Prime Minister Netanyahu for agreeing to the plan and for trusting that if we work together, we can bring an end to the death and destruction that we've seen for so many years, decades, even centuries, and begin a new chapter of security, peace, and prosperity for the entire region. And I want to just say that my meetings and dialogue that we had with so many countries, Saudi Arabia as an example, the king is a phenomenal person. The Emir of Qatar, he's an incredible people. UAE, and that's MBZ and ABZ. We're totally involved. These are the people that we've been dealing with and who've been actually very much involved in this negotiation, giving us ideas, things they can live with, things they can't live with. Pretty complex. I mean, after 2,000, 3,000 years, whatever it is, I guess it's got to be a little complex, or it would have been done a long time ago. The King of Jordan was with us, as you know, in the United Nations. The President of Turkey, President Erdogan, is a friend of mine, a strong man, but a good man. President of Indonesia, somebody who's an amazing leader, Prabowo. He is an amazing leader and respected by everybody. He was in the room with us. We were together with most of these people that I'm mentioning. Others were by phone or the next day. The Prime Minister and the Field Marshal of Pakistan, they were with us right from the beginning. Incredible. In fact, they just put out a statement that they fully believe in this pact. It just came out just as I was walking around. They said, "Sir, you have a big notice from the Prime Minister of Pakistan and from the Field Marshal that they back this 100%. President El-Sisi of Egypt, who's terrific. And these are people I've gotten to know over the years. I mean, I would say it started around 2015 and then went into 2016 when the presidency officially began. But I've known him actually for a long time, and there are many cases really great men. I can't say in all cases, but I will tell you, in many cases, they're great men, and some great women, too. They tend to be mostly men, however, I will say that. But if accepted by Hamas, this proposal calls for the release of all remaining hostages immediately, but in no case more than 72 hours. So the hostages are coming back, and I hate even saying this from the standpoint, doesn't sound right, but it is so important to the parents. The bodies of the young men, I believe in almost all cases, the young men are coming back immediately. I met with parents. The parents felt as strongly about getting the body of their dead boy back as they did as though the boy were alive and well. It's so important to them. And it means the immediate end to the war itself, not just Gaza. It's the war itself. Under the plan, Arab and Muslim countries have committed, and in writing in many cases, but I actually would take their word for it. The people I mentioned, I'd take their word for it, to demilitarize Gaza, and that's quickly. Decommission the military capabilities of Hamas and all other terror organizations. Do that immediately. And we're relying on the countries that I named and others to deal with Hamas. And I'm hearing that Hamas wants to get this done too, and that's a good thing. And destroy all terror infrastructure, including the tunnels, weapons of production facilities. They have a lot of production facilities that we're destroying. They'll also help train local police forces in the areas that we're discussing right now, in particular in and around Gaza, working with the new transitional authority in Gaza. All parties will agree on a timeline for Israeli forces to withdraw in phases. They'll be withdrawing in phases. No more shooting, hopefully, as progress is made toward achieving these goals. Arab and Muslim nations need to be allowed the chance to fulfill these commitments of dealing with Hamas, they have to deal with them because they were the one group that we have not dealt with. I haven't dealt with them. But the Arab countries are going to, and Muslim countries are going to be dealing with Hamas, and I believe they've already been there. I think they probably have an understanding, and they haven't maybe mentioned that, but I would imagine they do. Otherwise, they wouldn't have gone as far as they've gone. If they're unable to do so, then Israel would have the absolute right and actually our full backing, the U.S. full backing. Marco's here, and a lot of our leaders are here, our great Vice President, Susie Wiles, Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner. They've been so involved in this process. I don't think anybody else could have done it or even come close. But it's we're right there. We're right there. First time in thousands of years, I think you can probably say, if you really look into it, if you study back, if you're a scholar, you would say thousands of years. Israel would have my full backing to finish the job of destroying the threat of Hamas. But I hope that we're going to have a deal for peace. And if Hamas rejects the deal, which is always possible, they're the only one left. Everyone else has accepted it. But I have a feeling that we're going to have a positive answer. But if not, as you know, Bibi, you'd have our full backing to do what you would have to do. Everyone understands that the ultimate result must be the elimination of any danger posed in the region, and that danger is caused by Hamas. The tyranny of terror has to end, and this is, again, something that we're looking for. This is eternity. This is for forever. To ensure the success of this effort, my plan calls for the creation of a new international oversight body, the Board of Peace, we call it, the Board of Peace, sort of a beautiful name, the Board of Peace, which will be headed, not at my request, believe me, I'm very busy, but we have to make sure this works. The leaders of the Arab world and Israel and everybody involved asked me to do this, so it would be headed by a gentleman known as President Donald J. Trump of the United States. That's what I want, is some extra work to do, but it's so important that I'm willing to do it, and we'll do it right, and we're going to put leaders from other countries on, and leaders that are very distinguished leaders, and we'll have a board, and one of the people that wants to be on the board is the UK former Prime Minister, Tony Blair, good man, very good man, and some others. And they'll be named over the next few days. And it'll be quite the board. Working, everybody wants to be on it now. I don't know if that had anything to do. They named me and everybody else wanted to be on it. I guess they figure, well, he's a soft touch. He'll be easy to deal with. Working with the World Bank and others, it will be responsible for recruiting and training a new government that will be made up of Palestinians, along with highly qualified experts from all around the world. Hamas and other terrorist factions will play no role in the board, but they'll play no role in the governance of Gaza at all, directly or indirectly. As you know, thousands of Hamas leaders have been killed and soldiers have been killed. And we can never forget October 7th, but thousands have paid the price for that. And now it's time to get our hostages back and get back to trying to build something that's really great and very important. In our meeting today, Prime Minister Netanyahu was very clear about his opposition to a Palestinian state. And he continuously mentions October 7th, and I understand that. Most people do. And I understand and respect his position on many things, but what he's doing today is so good for Israel. I notice that they have large crowds gathering in Israel all the time, and they have my name up. They like me for whatever reason, Bibi, I don't know, but they do like me. But they say two things: please get the hostages back, and please end the war. They've had it. It's had it. So I think it's a very popular thing you do, because he's a warrior. He doesn't know about getting back to a normal way of life, but he is a warrior, and Israel's lucky to have him. But now the people want to get back to peace. They want to get back to normalization in a true sense. Several countries have foolishly recognized the Palestinian state. As you know, some of our European friends, allies, good people, but they're really, I think, doing that because they're very tired of what's going on for so many decades. They've been presidents and prime ministers for years, and during this time, having to do with the Middle East, all they're doing is talking about the same thing over and over. They want to see it get back. And nobody wants that more than me, or I believe Bibi too. But the people of Israel want it. They really want it. They want the hostages back. That includes the probably 32 bodies that we're talking about, 20 people that are living, 32 or so people that are dead, and they want to have peace. So let us not forget how we got here. Hamas was elected by the Palestinian people. Israel withdrew from Gaza thinking they would live in peace. Remember that a long time ago, they withdrew. They said, you take it. This is our contribution to peace. But that didn't work out. That didn't work out. It was the opposite of peace. They pulled away. They let them have it. And I never forgot that, because I said, that doesn't sound like a good deal to me. As a real estate person, I mean, they gave up the ocean, right? Ron, they gave up the ocean. They said, who would do this deal? And it still didn't work out. They were very generous, actually. And they gave up the most magnificent piece of land in many ways in the Middle East. And they said, all we want to do now is have peace. And that request was not honored. Instead of building a better life for the Palestinians, Hamas diverted resources to build over 400 miles of tunnels and terror infrastructure, rocket production facilities, and hid their military command posts and launch sites in hospitals, schools, and mosques. So if you went after them, you'd be after them, and you wouldn't even realize you ended up knocking out a hospital or school or a mosque. That terrible thing, terrible, terrible way to have to fight. No fight is good, but that's a real bad one. So there are many Palestinians who wish to live in peace. Many. I've seen so many of them. And they have support. And I challenge the Palestinians to take responsibility for their destiny, because that's what we're giving them. We're giving them responsibility for their destiny, fully condemn and prohibit terrorism and earn their way to a brighter future. They don't want the life that they've had. They've had a rough life with Hamas. If the Palestinian Authority does not complete the reforms that I laid out in my vision for peace in 2020, they'll have only themselves to blame. We're giving them an amazing footprint, and they have amazing support from the leaders of the Arab world and the Muslim world, the great leaders. These are great leaders. These are unbelievable leaders that have built great countries and very wealthy countries. What the future holds for the Palestinians, no one really knows, but the plan that we put forward today is focused on ending the war immediately, getting all of our hostages back, getting everything back. Hard to believe when you even say it, and creating conditions for durable Israeli security and Palestinian success. Israeli security is going to be involved. We're going to help you. We'll be there with you in terms of helping with security. We want to make sure it works. We just want to make sure it works. There shouldn't be a shot fired. Now, there will be, I guess, because that's the way it seems to be, but there shouldn't have to be within a few days. There shouldn't have to be a shot fired. Maybe for eternity. Wouldn't that be nice? I hope it's true. I can tell you the leadership of that region feels that there's a good chance of it being true. So this will lead to this agreement that we're talking about will lead to a sustainable long-term peace. No president in history has been a greater friend of the state of Israel than I have, in addition to negotiating the Abraham Accords. I like to say it that way because the real people, that's what they call Abraham. I would say Abraham, but it's so much nicer when you say Abraham. So much more elegant. But the Abraham Accords, they're amazing. Jared, you did that along with your group of geniuses. and nobody thought that could be done. We have 4 countries, and Sleepy Joe Biden didn't do a thing. He didn't even know what the hell they were. He should have had them fold up. But I think this will also lead to packing them. And who knows, maybe even Iran can get in there. I hope, we hope we're going to be able to get along with Iran. I think they're going to be open to it. I really believe that. But they could be a member. I long ago said, I'll bet you at some point Iran will be a member of the Accords. And little did I realize it was going to take this turn. That was some turn we did with the B-2s. But I think they might very well be there because it's a great thing for them economically. I recognize the eternal capital of Israel. I opened the American embassy in Jerusalem. That was something that everyone said would never be done, could never be done. Virtually every president for many, many years, for decades, would campaign on making Jerusalem the capital of Israel. They campaigned on it over and over. Is that right, Steve? Is that right? Everyone, and when they got to it, and I understand why now, because it was so. When I got to office, I campaigned on it too. I said, we're going to make it. And then I'd get calls from the leaders of various countries saying, please don't do it. Please don't do it. It'll end the whole world. Please don't do it. And finally, I just didn't say anything, and I did it. People were calling me before I did it because they heard I was going to do it. And leaders of countries were calling me. And I think it was on a Thursday that I did it. And they'd call me Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 3-4 times a day, and I said, tell them I'll call them back on Friday. And I announced it on Thursday, and I called them back, the biggest people in the world, and they said, you've done it. I said, done what? You've made the capital of Israel, Jerusalem, and we wanted to talk yet. I wish you called me a little sooner. Maybe I could have done something about it. So that was a lot easier than getting into an argument, because I knew what they were calling about. And you know what? It turned out to be amazing. Everybody thought it was going to lead to the end of the world, right? The end of the world, Ron, that's what they said. It didn't lead to anything. It just led to something that I promised, and something that was very, very popular for Jewish people and a lot of other people, too. I recognize Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, and I cut taxpayer funding to the corrupt United Nations Relief and Works Agency. And United Nations was interesting because, as you know, a few days ago, they introduced me. Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States. I'm looking at my teleprompter, and the thing was dead, stone cold, dead. The thing's up here. I have a long, beautiful speech to make. I'm back 30 feet back, and I'm saying, they're introducing me. There's nothing on my teleprompter. So, but I made a speech. I actually got good marks. You think Biden could have done that? I don't think so. I don't think he could have done that. I don't think too many people could have done it. But actually, it was actually more of a speech from my heart, if you want to know the truth. I think it was maybe better in certain ways because it was from the heart. It has to be from the heart. Otherwise, you're in big trouble. But I cut taxpayer funding for that very corrupt United Nations Relief and Works Agency, and nobody thought that would be done, and withdrew from the horrible Iran nuclear deal that was imposed upon Israel by Barack Hussein Obama and Biden. And I don't think Biden knew anything about it, though. I don't think he knows anything about it now, actually, if you ask him. He'd say, what is that? And we obliterated Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity, making it impossible for them to have a nuclear weapon, which they would have had probably in about 2 months from that. But I've never asked Israel to compromise its security, but we had big, strong talk. Nobody's been better to Israel. No president's been better to Israel than Donald Trump. But we had a long, strong talk, Bibi and I, and he understands it's time. It's time. History has shown, and the people of Israel want it. And the people of the Middle East want it. The people of enemies of Israel want it, but they don't have really too many enemies right now. And you know what? Many countries have gained great respect for Israel, for the way they fight, for the job they do, including me. I had respect anyway, but they gained respect. History has shown us that those who have relations with Israel have thrived. while those who have devoted resources and attention toward the destruction and even annihilation of Israel have languished. They haven't done well. Israel is not going anywhere. They're going to coexist with other people and countries in the region, from Syria to Lebanon to Saudi Arabia. The promise of a new Middle East is so clearly within our reach. This is the closest we've ever come to real peace, not fake peace, not political fool's peace. If we can get this difficult problem solved, the opportunities for all within that vast region of this world, it's a vast region, it's unlimited. The Abraham Accords show that all countries are better off when they communicate and work together and embrace new opportunities. I hope Jared and Steve and Susie and Marco and JD, we have great people. I hope you guys are going to work very hard to get these other countries in, because now they have no excuse. There's no longer an excuse. They were somewhere hesitant. And I tell you, the 4 countries that went in, I give them tremendous credit, and it's worked out incredibly well for them. In the same spirit, I'm pleased to report that earlier today we took another important step toward greater understanding in the region. A short time ago, we had a historic phone call in the Oval Office with Prime Minister Tani, who's really a great person. So we had a great talk, and I was on the phone, and Bibi was talking. Prime Minister Al Thani was of Qatar. They really had a heart-to-heart conversation. It was a great conversation, I thought. It was productive. It was everything that you need to have something turn out to be successful. And I want to thank Bibi, and I want to thank the Prime Minister. It was fantastic. We agreed to launch a formal trilateral mechanism between Israel, Qatar, and the United States to begin a dialogue to enhance mutual security, correct misperceptions, and avoid future misgivings. And I want to thank Qatar, its leadership, and the Emir. He's a fantastic person. I think, I'm going to be his public relations man because I know him differently than a lot of people know him. But he wants peace. He wants to see peace. And his people, and they really acknowledge the critical role that they've played as mediator. And again, we're not quite finished. We have to get Hamas, but I think they're going to be able to do that. So now it's time for Hamas to accept the terms of the plan that we've put forward today. And again, this is a different Hamas than we were dealing with, because I guess over 20,000 have been killed. Their leadership has been killed 3 times over. So you're really dealing with different people than we've been dealing with over the last 4 years, 5 years. Everyone has done their part and come to the table in good faith. Our Arab and Muslim partners are fully prepared to step up and fulfill their commitments for the benefit of the people of Gaza and the entire region. They're willing to step up and do a lot. They really are. There are a lot of good people involved. Everybody who wants to see an end to the violence and destruction should be united in calling for Hamas to accept the extremely fair proposal so that we can end the war and get us back our hostages right now and have everlasting peace. And I look forward to having relationships with everyone. As the chairman of the board, I'll be involved, and we'll have meetings with some very smart people that'll be working over there to make sure that we haven't just been wasting time with an agreement that doesn't get done. The task of building peace will not be easy. There are some of the hardest problems in the world to solve, and that's why it's been going on for so many centuries. But too many lives are at stake not to try, and this was more than a try. I mean, I think this is something that gets done when you have virtually every country, and these are powerful countries that have a lot of money, and the money can make things happen. A lot of countries try, and they don't have any money. These are very rich countries that can make things happen. So together we'll forge a much safer and more hopeful future for everybody, including Israel. And I want to thank Prime Minister Netanyahu for his partnership. And I want to thank all of the leaders, the kings and the emirs and the presidents and prime ministers, people I mentioned. And they've been absolutely fantastic to work with, and it's just happened very quickly. It's happened from a couple of weeks before I had a couple of meetings, but a couple of weeks before we went to the United Nations, and we had some incredible meetings. It all came to place. It all took place, and everybody wanted to be a part of it. I don't have anybody that's saying we don't want anything to do with it. It's just the opposite. And I'll tell you, a couple of years ago, a year ago, I don't think we would have had this kind of participation, Mr. VP, right? I don't think we would have had. It's been amazing. The participation was 100%. Everybody wants to be a part of it. And everybody, those very strong countries, everybody wants it to work. So, Bibi, congratulations on this. I think this will be your crowning achievement, frankly. If this all works out, we think it will. It's going to be your crowning achievement. And I want to thank you very much for being here. Thank you. Please.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. President, first I want to thank you for graciously hosting me once again in the White House. And second, I want to thank you for your friendship and for your leadership. From Jerusalem to Tehran, from the Golan Heights to Gaza, you've proven time and again what I've said many times. You are the greatest friend that Israel has ever had in the White House. And Mr. President, you and I both know it's not even close. While you focus at home on making America great again, your leadership abroad is changing the world for the better, ending wars and advancing peace. I believe that today we're taking a critical step towards both ending the war in Gaza and setting the stage for dramatically advancing peace in the Middle East, and I think beyond the Middle East, in very important Muslim countries. I support your plan to end the war in Gaza, which achieves our war aims. It will bring back to Israel all our hostages, dismantle Hamas's military capabilities, end its political rule, and ensure that Gaza never again poses a threat to Israel. We would not have achieved this turning point without the courage and sacrifice of our incredibly brave soldiers. They fight like lions to defend the people of Israel, and they serve on the front line in the war between civilization and barbarism. Mr. President, when our two countries stand shoulder to shoulder, we achieve the impossible. Just a few months ago, in Operation Rising Lion and Operation Midnight Hammer, we struck a decisive blow against Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile program. Your bold decision to send those B-2s made the region safer and the world safer. Now, under your leadership, we're taking the next step to win the war and expand the peace. Your plan is consistent with the 5 principles my government set for the end of the war and the day after Hamas. Everybody asks, what is your plan for the day after Hamas? Here's our plan. Passed it in the cabinet. All our hostages, both those who are alive and those who died, all of them will return home immediately. Hamas will be disarmed. Gaza will be demilitarized. Israel will retain security responsibility, including a security perimeter for the foreseeable future. And lastly, Gaza will have a peaceful civilian administration that is run neither by Hamas nor by the Palestinian Authority. If Hamas agrees to your plan, Mr. President, the first step will be a modest withdrawal, followed by the release of all our hostages within 72 hours. The next step will be the establishment of an international body charged with fully disarming Hamas and demilitarizing Gaza. I appreciate your willingness to lead the body, Mr. President. I really appreciate it because you have a lot of things to do, and this is important. And it reflects the confidence that this will give everyone, that things will be followed up on all the commitments made. The fact that you're taking this on, I think, helps a lot to make sure that everything flows in the direction that we want. Now, if this international body succeeds, we will have permanently ended the war. Israel will conduct further withdrawals linked to the extent of disarmament and demilitarization, but will remain in the security perimeter for the foreseeable future. I think we should understand that we're giving everybody a chance to have this done peacefully, something that will achieve all our war objectives without any further bloodshed. But if Hamas rejects your plan, Mr. President, or if they supposedly accept it and then basically do everything to counter it, then Israel will finish the job by itself. This can be done the easy way, or it can be done the hard way, but it will be done. We prefer the easy way, but it has to be done. All these goals must be achieved because we didn't fight this horrible fight, sacrifice the finest of our young men to have Hamas stay in Gaza and threaten us again and again and again with these horrific massacres. Mr. President, I was encouraged by your clear statement at the UN against the recognition of a Palestinian state. That would be an outcome that, after October 7th, would reward terrorism, undermine security, and endanger Israel's very existence. As for the Palestinian Authority, I appreciate your firm position that the PA can have no role whatsoever in Gaza without undergoing a radical and genuine transformation. In your 2020 peace plan, which you mentioned just now, you made clear what that transformation requires. It's not lip service. It's not checking a box. It's a fundamental, genuine, and enduring transformation. And that means ending pay to slay, changing the poisonous textbooks that teach hatred to Jews, to Palestinian children, stopping incitement in the media, ending lawfare against Israel at the ICC, the ICJ, recognizing the Jewish state, and many, many other reforms. It won't come as a surprise to you that the vast majority of Israelis have no faith that the PA Leopard will change its spots. But rather than wait for this miraculous transformation, your plan provides a practical and realistic path forward for Gaza in the coming years, in which Gaza will be administered neither by Hamas nor the Palestinian Authority, but by those committed to a genuine peace with Israel. I think this can be not only a new beginning for Gaza, I think it can be a new beginning for the entire region. Under your leadership, we can re-energize, well, I've got to contribute my own, we can re-energize the Abraham Accords. That's what it's called in the original Hebrew, Abraham. Abraham is fine, Abraham, however you want to call it. Under your leadership, Mr. President, we can re-energize the Abraham Accords that we forged 5 years ago. We can expand them to many more Arab and Muslim nations that choose moderation over extremism. I think there's an opportunity here. It's not going to be easy, it's tough going, but I think if we succeed, you're absolutely right. We're going to open possibilities that nobody even dreamed of. But I think we dream of them. As you've told me, Mr. President, and you've told the world many, many times, you said, remember October 7th. Remember October 7th. And we do. We will never forget the horrors of October 7th, and we will do whatever is necessary to make sure they don't happen again. Since October 7th, Israel's enemies have learned a hard truth. Those who attack us pay a heavy price, but those who partner with us advance progress and security for their peoples. President Trump just said it. It's also in the Bible. It says, those who will bless you will be blessed, and those who will curse you will be cursed. And that's actually what is happening. We want the blessings. I think we've done a lot in the past 2 years to end the curse. We're not finished, but we've done a lot. And we've done a lot together to end the curse. I want to thank your entire team for their efforts to get to this point. I especially want to thank Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner for their indefatigable work to bring Israel and Arab states in the region closer together. I am deeply grateful to both of them for their work. We had a phone call today just to make it clear. I said to the Prime Minister of Qatar, Israel was targeting terrorists, wasn't targeting Qatar. And of course, we regretted the loss of the Qatari citizen, wasn't our target. And I very much appreciate President Trump's proposal to have a trilateral body, the United States, Israel, and Qatar, to work out respective grievances. There are quite a few. But if we could try to mitigate them or put it on a different footing, I think that'll be good for everyone. Above all the people, the fine team, and many helpers who've done this, I want to thank you, Mr. President. History has already shown that under your leadership, Israel and America can change the face of the Middle East. And today I'm hopeful that your plan to end the war in Gaza will do so again and do so soon. It will free our hostages, end Hamas's tyranny in Gaza, and enable a more secure and prosperous future for the peoples of our region. Thank you, Mr. President. May God bless America. May God bless Israel. May God bless the indispensable alliance between our countries. And may I add in Hebrew, G'mal Chatima Tova, may we all be inscribed in the book of life. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bibi. So I think while we wait for these documents to be signed and get everybody in line, I think it maybe is not really appropriate to take questions. I'm meeting with, as you know, a couple of Democrats in a little while about the country, about keeping our country open. They're going to have to do some things because their ideas are not very good ones. They're very bad for our country. So we'll see how that works out. But this is something that was really historic today. This was something that was amazing. I think, Bibi, I mean, depending on you, I think while we're waiting for signatures and waiting for approvals from a lot of different countries that are involved in this, we probably shouldn't take questions? Or would you like to take a question or two from perhaps a friendly Israeli reporter, if there's such a thing?
That's a very, very tough proposition. But I would think, Mr. President, that I would go by your instinct that this is, we'll have enough time for questions. Let's settle the issue first, I think. No.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Well, there we have it. Trump and Netanyahu leaving that joint news conference. They're not taking any questions from the press as they say they want the agreement to come through before they take any questions. Orkan, your immediate reaction?
So this ended up being press briefing, not a press conference or news conference. It's effectively, I think we are not talking about any deal. We're talking about effectively US proposal backed by Israel offered to Hamas, and Hamas needs to accept it in order for it to be fully implemented. Otherwise, Israel will continue its actions on the ground. And I think that was very clear from what Trump said. That was very clear from Benjamin Netanyahu. So Trump said that if they don't accept it, Israel will do whatever it needs to do. Bibi has our full backing. I think it was clearly stated. And Benjamin Netanyahu said that there's an easy way of doing it.
Israel will finish the job the easy way or the hard way.
By the way, so it basically means that they achieve their war objectives, whatever the cost may be, whether Trump or 20-point plan. By the way, it's no longer 21-point plan, it's 20-point plan.
Can we stay on this a bit? What do you make of that the White House will essentially wash its hand of Israeli military escalation if Hamas are to refuse?
I think it's very clear. It's very clear. The proposition there is very tough. It's very unequivocal. This is a plan. This is sensible. This is backed by US. It's prepared by US, by Envoy Witkov, and accepted by Israel. If Hamas is not accepting this, Israel will need to achieve its war objectives, because Hamas, the Gaza constitutes a threat to Israel, and it shouldn't constitute a threat, and therefore Israel should action. It effectively means that the human suffering that we have been so worried about, most of us, will continue there if Hamas does not accept, and then responsibility will lie with Hamas, not with Israel. So this is effectively that sort of construct I see at the heart of this proposal. My feeling is that it will be accepted by Hamas, but my reservation, and fundamental reservation, is that it will be accepted, there will be early implementation, but on the basis of the way Israel has been operating. And with my understanding of the mindset of Benjamin Netanyahu, which is effectively based on this crystal clear realization that Hamas is a danger and Israel should be very forceful on the ground, I think at certain stage of the implementation, there will be breakup moment, and Israel will not withdraw fully. A similar pattern was observed in Lebanon. Well, we remember that arrangement agreed back in last year on the 27th of November. The gradual withdrawal of Israeli forces from south of the Litani River in return for the government in Beirut actually taking those posts, getting rid of Hezbollah posts. That hasn't been fully implemented. Similar could be replicated here.
Cautious optimism there from Orkan in Baku. But let's hear the view from Washington and our correspondent Ubi Shabanda, who is there. Ubi, it's not quite a full agreement as Hamas still needs to accept it, but Trump is still calling it a historic day. What is your immediate reaction to the press conference we've just heard?
A major step forward towards peace in the Middle East and an end to the Gaza war. President Trump laid out the full details of a plan essentially guaranteed by President Trump, who will now serve on the head of what he is calling a peace board that will, for an interim period, oversee the governance of the Gaza Strip. Tony Blair, the former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, will be on this peace board, as well as others who are yet to be named. Now, remember, Hamas, one of their main conditions for agreeing to a deal in previous talks was to have a finalized deal being guaranteed by President Trump, because Hamas did not trust Prime Minister Netanyahu to follow through on any negotiated deal. So here the United States now plays a central role, along with the Arab countries like the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Turkey, and Indonesia, in pushing Hamas to agree and sign on the dotted line to this deal, a deal that would bring back all the hostages that are alive, as well as the bodies of the hostages who have been killed, back to Israel. That would then lead to the release of hundreds of Palestinian prisoners, including those serving life sentences from Israeli jails. And that would then establish a timetable for the gradual Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. Benjamin Netanyahu said that this deal achieves his war aims. It demilitarizes Gaza, disarms Hamas as a militant group, and then establishes an international force that would oversee the disarming and demilitarization of Gaza. And it would also offer members of Hamas the opportunity for amnesty or to depart the Gaza Strip. It was significant that President Trump started this press conference in thanking Arab and Muslim countries that he'd been meeting with in the preceding weeks in New York to essentially catalyze this plan and lead to this peace conference and a deal that has been agreed upon by Prime Minister Netanyahu. And it is believed that a great deal of pressure by President Trump led to Bibi Netanyahu to agree to this deal, and to also agree on the same day to make a telephone call to the Prime Minister of Qatar and apologize for the Israeli strike in Doha that killed a Qatari security guard, violated Qatari national sovereignty, and attempted to kill the Hamas negotiating team, although that strike failed. So this seems to be a major step forward here. It seems that President Trump is confident that his Arab and Muslim allies can get the Hamas leadership to then agree to this deal. Most of Hamas's militant and political leadership has been killed by Israeli security forces since the conflict began on October 7th. So now with Bibi Netanyahu here on the world stage in the White House in front of President Trump, who's the guarantor of this deal, with now Netanyahu is saying that he fully will abide by this deal. The ball is in Hamas's court, and it seems President Trump is confident that the ending of the fighting, the returning of the hostages, could usher in a new era for the wider Middle East.
So where is that confidence coming from, in your view? Is it the fact that this has had input from countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Jordan? Where is this optimism coming from, that this is different from all of the other talks and negotiations that have taken place since this war began?
Well, the difference is that you have Prime Minister Netanyahu standing right next to President Trump in front of the whole world media in a live press conference saying that he agrees to a deal that would lead to Israel halting the war, that would lead to the release of all of the hostages immediately. That hasn't happened before. And that is a very significant step here, one that would not have taken place without a great deal of political pressure by President Trump, and with President Trump agreeing to establish a peace board, which essentially puts the United States as a guarantor of this deal and to ensure its execution along with the Arab. And a key component to this deal is that the Palestinian Authority will not have any say in the future governance of a Gaza Strip that is no longer ruled by Hamas. So that is something that is in this deal that the United States and its Arab and Muslim allies agreed to, that the Israelis agreed to. So now once Hamas signs this deal, and if they sign this deal, it's still not assured that they will, the technical details will ultimately be the determining factor on whether or not this deal stands the test of time. Certainly, this is welcomed news by the family members of the hostages who are still alive, that this is a real chance to get their loved ones back alive. And for the family members who have still not been able to grieve with the bodies of their deceased loved ones still being held in captivity by Hamas, and certainly perhaps hope for millions of Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip that they could now see a light at the end of the tunnel to go back to live their lives. And with the US, European countries, and Arab and Muslim allies saying that they will contribute to their reconstruction and redevelopment of a demilitarized Gaza that will no longer pose a threat to the Israeli state.
But there must be some concern, surely, among Gaza civilians that Trump has said the White House will essentially wash its hands of any Israeli military escalation if Hamas were to refuse this deal. How is that going down among Gazan civilians?
Well, that's a very good question, and that puts a great deal of pressure now on Hamas, with Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump and the entirety of the Arab and Muslim allies agreeing with this plan. Hamas is going to face extraordinary pressure back at home, as well as pressure by its Arab interlocutors to agree to this deal. Many Palestinians just want an end to this war, and Hamas has, according to reports, been facing pressure from the Palestinian people, who have lost so many thousands of civilians killed, no water, very little food. They want to go back to a sense of normalcy before October 7th. So now Hamas is going to face extraordinary pressure, both amongst the Palestinians and amongst the Arab and Muslim states who have been its primary interlocutors to agree to this deal that would essentially end Hamas as a fighting and political force in Gaza.
And in looking at this board of peace, Tony Blair, what's behind that choice?
That's a very good question. We have been seeing reports in the preceding days that Tony Blair, who heads a nonprofit group, the Tony Blair Institute, wants to play some sort of role in establishing a non-Hamas, non-Palestinian technocratic administration in Gaza that would be acceptable to Israel and its security concerns. We know that the former Prime Minister, Blair, does have extensive contacts in the Middle East, in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and throughout the wider Arabian Gulf. And given Israeli opposition to the Palestinian Authority having a say in the future of Gaza, some type of compromise has to be made. And well, who else is left? And we don't know the details of what this board of peace will look like, but President Trump was adamant that he will be the chairman of this board of peace, essentially sending a message to the Israelis and to Hamas that this deal is ultimately guaranteed by Trump himself.
And I'd like to bring in the view from Jordan now. Thank you, Ubi, for providing those updates from Washington. Now, what is your immediate reaction to this press conference between Trump and Netanyahu?
It's a good conference in the sense that we finally saw some pressure on Netanyahu and a compromise on Netanyahu. What is really sad is that this is exactly the same offer that Hamas and others and negotiators had offered a year ago. Full release of prisoners in return for full end of the war. So we had to wait another year and lose a lot of lives because of that. Anyway, this plan has the answers to many questions, which is that how to gradually end the occupation and gradually bring in a Palestinian state. Now, what would make this plan really good, and if Trump, as he said, is only interested in much bigger than Gaza, then this international force should also move into to the West Bank. We need exactly that force to take over in places like Jenin and Nablus, where the Israeli army is allowing settlers to cause havoc to Palestinians. So if the goal is a regional Palestinian-Israeli peace, and if it needs to be done on a gradual basis, we need to end the Israeli occupation not only of Gaza but also of the West Bank, and we need to do that on a gradual basis. So we've always wanted, and Palestinians have always called for an international force to come to the West Bank and the occupied territories and ensure the Israeli end their occupation. Now that we have declared a Palestinian state, now that most countries of the world, 80%, have recognized a Palestinian state, the next step is for Israel to end its occupation and to gradually allow for the Palestinian state in Gaza and the West Bank to be established. But, you know, some of the things that were said today almost sound like a new colonialization and no colonial property. Now, we heard Trump's earlier ideas of, and he even repeated them, of the ocean and the Riviera and all that. I hope that this type of re-engineering of the future of the Palestinians will not happen. The idea that Trump and Tony Blair will decide the future of Palestine is not what the self-determination principle means. I think there has to be a gradual ending of the occupation and a gradual taking over of the Palestinians to rule their own country.
And Trump said he is feeling positive that Hamas is going to accept this proposal. How optimistic are you that Hamas will accept this deal?
Well, you know, the Israelis have always wanted to dismantle Hamas. That was a condition. Today, this was not a condition. I didn't see the actual condition. Now, Netanyahu said they will withdraw in the same speed as Hamas is dismantling, but there is no clear process of dismantling. So we don't know exactly who will take over, how the dismantling will take place, who will be the security force, who will be the Arab and international force that will come into Gaza. There's a lot of question marks. The actual fact that they did not answer a single question shows that there's a lot of ambiguity in this plan, that they themselves know if they're asked by tough questions, they would have to reveal many things. Right now, I think all sides want this plan to be accepted, but there's a lot of details that have to be answered. And I doubt, we didn't see a timeline, for example. There's no time frame except for when the hostages will be released. There's no other time frame. Israel can stay in Gaza for as long as they want. The international force and the board of peace can take as long time as they want. So we don't have an end of war. There's no timeline. I don't know if this plan is going to be put to a Security Council resolution or not. The reform ideas of 2020 are an excuse. Palestinians have already answered most of the items on that 2020 reform, but it's an excuse not to recognize Palestine. This will pass, but they did not, Trump did not deny Palestinian role, and Netanyahu spoke about the Palestinian force in an unusually neutral way. He said he's against the Palestinian state, but he did not say that he's against the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah. He just said they don't want them in Gaza, but they will be Palestinians in Gaza, and Palestinians generally are supporting the PLO. So if you're going to have elections in Gaza, if you're going to have any kind of a role for Palestinians, that means the Palestinian leadership will be represented in Gaza.
Still a lot of details to be ironed out, certainly. And how concerned are you that Hamas won't accept this proposal, given that Trump has said the White House will essentially wash its hand of any Israeli military escalation if Hamas were not to accept that deal? I asked this to our Washington correspondent, and I'll ask it to you.
Yeah,
what does this mean for
understand.
Gazan civilians?
I think it's very bad if Hamas doesn't accept, but Hamas will not accept a very vague plan. They will accept a much more detailed plan once we see the details, and there has to be a timeline. Israel cannot stay in Gaza forever. This is what this plan sounds like. And Israel is deciding when they will withdraw, not the plan. There's no plan for Israeli withdrawal. And ending the war is a question mark. As long as they're there, they will be attacked, and if they're attacked, they'll attack back, and the plan will crumble. So I think they need to have much more details about the timeline and about what is expected of each side. It's clear that the dismantling of Hamas is not part of the deal, but what is part of the deal, we don't know. What will allow Israel to withdraw, how they will decide to withdraw, will Trump have to do this reality check for Netanyahu after a few months? We don't know. But it's clear that there is no timeline. It's clear that the Israelis have not committed to end the war. They're committed to basically get their hostages, and that's scary. And I think Hamas will be afraid of giving up the hostages and then finding themselves without having any assets or guarantees that the war will end. There has to be an end of the war timeline.
Thank you very much for joining us and providing your insight and reaction then. Thank you, Orkan, for joining me throughout this here in Baku, and thank you to you for watching. Now, we've heard from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and US President Donald Trump. Trump says a peace deal is beyond very close, as the White House released a 20-point comprehensive plan to end the Gaza conflict. Both leaders expressed support for the plan, while Hamas says it has not formally received the proposal. Trump also said Netanyahu will have US backing to do what he has to do regarding Hamas if they don't agree to the plan. We'll continue following these developments. Stay with us for the latest news and global stories from Washington and around the world. Once again, thank you for watching.